Life Audio.
Welcome to the Crosswalk Devotional. We are so glad to have you listening with us. Today's topic is forgiveness. After a brief message from one of our sponsors, we will listen to today's devotion. Burying Sins in the Sand. Written and read by Kyle Norman. One day, after Moses had grown up, he went out to where his own people were, and he watched them at their hard labor. He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his own people. Looking this way and that way and seeing no one, he killed the Egyptian, and he hid him in the sand. Exodus 2, verses 11 and 12. There are two events that are most well known in Moses' life. First is his birth narrative, about being placed in a basket and set floating down a river. The second is the burning bush, where he meets the living God and receives his divine mandate. But tucked into the middle of these two events is the story of perhaps the worst day in Moses' life. See, Moses, at this point, he exists between two worlds. Everyone knows he is not Egyptian, but he has been raised by Pharaoh's daughter, and he enjoys all the benefits of Egyptian royalty. He is Hebrew-born, but he lives apart from his people, and he doesn't share their sufferings. And as we heard here, he stands and watches them at their hard labor. Maybe he even longs to be a part of it. The implication is that Moses watches the Israelite people often. He knows where to go to view them. And in one instant, in one moment, Moses' life completely crumbles. The drama of the scene is poignant. Moses sees an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, and he looks this way and that way, spying to see if anybody would notice him. And seeing no one, he kills the Egyptian, and then he proceeds to dig a shallow grave and bury his victim and his crime. And if the guilt and the fear that surrounded this act were not enough, later he goes to the people, and the people seem to turn on him. "Who made you judge?" they ask. "Are you going to kill us too?" Before we move on, let's just stop here. These questions, they're intriguing because they are questions that will be asked of Moses over 40 years in the wilderness. Who made you judge over us? Well, as we will read in Exodus 3, the Lord does. God calls Moses to be the leader of Israel, to decide between matters of right and wrong, to sit as judge over the people. Similarly, Moses will continually be asked during this Exodus wandering whether he leads the people to death, even though we know that his desire and his mission is to lead them to life. See, but that is not the reality here. In this place, Moses acts not out of a divine call, but out of a flurry of emotion. He wields not the Lord's power, but he yields his own strength. And his rule over Israel is a rule of death, not a rule of life. And because here Moses acts impulsively, everything seems to go wrong. Everything crashes around him. And when he is found out, well, he runs. Yes, he runs from Pharaoh's wrath. He runs to escape being killed. But he also runs from his own sense of guilt, his own sense of rejection. He runs from his own sin, shallowly buried in the sand. Intersecting faith and life. You know, God calls us from time to time to examine our lives. We are to look at our life before God and recognize our need for God. Make no mistake, this can be uncomfortable. We don't like to think about the sin in our life. But the act of coming to grips with where we need God's redemptive love is incredibly important. We need to look at our spiritual life and ask if we are living according to God's will for us. Or are we taking life into our own hands? Are we living from our own strength and our own perceptions? More pointedly, where do we need to be forgiven? What are the sins, the guilts, the shames that we have buried underneath the sands of our lives that remain undealt with? What are the sins that we have hidden that cause us to live in fear, just like Moses lives in fear? In Psalm 32, David says, "When I kept silent, my bones wasted away through all my groaning. My soul was sapped as in the heat of summer. But then I acknowledged my sin to you, and you forgave the guilt of my sin." See, the reason why the Lord asks us to look at the sins of our lives that maybe we have buried is not so that we can be judged by them, but so that we can be free from them. Jesus desires us to live our lives free from our spiritual burdens and weights, free to experience His gracious and unyielding love. If you feel particularly burdened and weighed down today, may you recognize Christ's gracious invitation to you. Stop heaping sand over that which you might want to remain hidden, but stand uncovered before the Lord and offer to God your complete selves. You won't be forsaken, you won't be rejected, you won't be condemned or cast off. When we unbury our sins, we become unburdened, and only then can we step into the life that God calls us to. For further reading, read Psalm 32, 1 John chapter 1, verse 9, and What Does the Bible Say About Forgiveness on crosswalk.com.
The Crosswalk Devotional is a production of Life Audio and Salem Media. If you liked what you heard today, please take a second to rate and review this podcast in your favorite podcast app so that more listeners like you can find the show. For more faith-filled, inspirational podcasts, visit us at lifeaudio.com.